sure. We'll see how that goes. So I assume Zoom figures out to report correct screen. So my Slack channel, something.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can start. Selim is presenting today. They want to hear about some busy the role of causality and explainable AI.
Yes, the role of causality and explainable AI. They could have titled it The Intersection of Causality and Explainable AI as well. Let's continue. Okay. So we will look at explainable AI, causality, inexplainable AI, the explanation part in the literature.
It's muted somehow. So we were nicely chatting.
Is it muted?
Oh, you are muted here, but that's fine. You're supposed to be muted. Anyone online, can you tell us if you hear us?
We hear you.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so the explanation in explainable AI is typically in the form of correlations, but correlation is not actually always so useful. The claim that found more support in the recent years or recent decades, I should say, is that causality is more useful for most cases than correlation. So we will, for example, take a look at this nice little graph here. Typically, in machine learning, we sacrifice either accuracy or explainability. But at the top right, we have causal AI.
But that's not what Parallel shows. Logistic regression, accurate and explainable. It's not in machine learning, but in deep learning, we sacrifice explainability by like just throwing more data into a larger pile of linear algebra.
Yeah. According to the authors, the idea is basically this triangle in correlation machine learning. Okay. So the objective can be summarized as look at the relationship between causality and explainable AI. Related to this, the authors say these two domains complement each other. There is proof about this in the discussions since the ancient times, like the times of Aristotle. I will talk about that more in the next slide.
He spoke about explainable AI. This guy made like all sorts of random comments.
Yeah.
Most of them are wrong.
Yeah, that he says things like reason, but those are the seeds that led to the growth of the tree that we call explainable AI. And there's a common goal between causality and explainable AI. It is to make systems that reason like humans or explain what a system is doing, typically an AI system, in a way that humans can comprehend. That is to say, they summarize this in the word form. So if I just give you the mathematical explanation or the code explanation or just the algorithm, you may not understand it if you aren't from a closed domain. Sometimes a text or a chart can be a better form to explain it. The third thing that's common is that both of these domains use counterfactual as one of their key elements when they are building their systems. I put an asterisk here because there is a difference between their definitions of counterfactual.
Yeah, are you going to go through that?
Yeah.
It's good to. upper for people for like, yeah.
Yeah. So we will now get what happened since the ancient times. So this discussion didn't just dwindle, it resisted, it evolved through time. It started with the ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle, and he said causality should be the foundation of explanation when we are discussing these things. Another ancient Greek philosopher, Socrates, actually died defending reason, because at his time there was a council made from his peers and his students that said in his lectures um, he's defying what is at the time defined by the only god or gods, I don't exactly remember. I think there were multiple gods defined by this state. But he was saying, hey, not everything can be done through the word of the gods. We should use our own interpretation of things. We should try to reason. But he took it to a level that's too far for his time. So by the judgment of the council, he was sentenced to drink poison and die. He could have, escaped or whatever, but maybe to demonstrate as a last final act of, I don't know, maybe some protest or some stepping the revolution in these discussions, he accepted the sentence and drank the poison and died. So after these ancient Greek times, the most important step comes with David Hume in the 1700s, and he defined causation in terms of sufficient and necessary conditions. After David Hume, we come to the 20th century. In 1948, Hempel and Oppenheim came up with the deductive nomological model. And then in 1984, Wesley Salmon was a prominent figure in these discussions that said scientific explanations must be statistically relevant to the outcome to be explained. So we start from Aristotle and came to the 20th century, and in even more recent times, we are now discussing how AI is pervasive in our most critical systems like healthcare, finance, education, law. Even above all of these, some heads of states are making decisions based on AI. For example, Trump was making some announcement about the grocery prices, and it seemed like all the decisions in the table that he was showing in the blackboard, I think he had in his hand, they were made by some LLM. Yeah, so this shows us that we have to be extremely careful when it comes to regulating AI, what it can affect, whose decisions it can affect, because today it's grocery prices, tomorrow it may come to declaration of war. Even worse, declaration of nuclear war, which would be an existential catastrophe. It's probably not going to come to that. However, the probability is not as close to zero as to be enough for us to just neglect it, because the outcome is too awful to just ignore these discussions. So what needs to be done is to specify these countermeasures against such possibilities in the law, or however we are regulating these things. And the first comprehensive AI legislation that I found online is Colorado AI Act, which is going to go into effect on February 1st. Now, this shouldn't alarm us so much to think there is nothing that's regulating AI right now. There are more general rules and laws related to technology and the internet and all these things, how they can be used. They usually use terms like computer processes, etc. And then in their subsections, sometimes they specifically mention AI. So there is some regulation, but this is the first one that's completely about AI. When it comes to the transparency of the models, we are observing that it's not at a level where people can trust them with their most important decisions. Not at the state level. I'm saying at the personal level, or even a small business. When they are going to make an important decision, they are still very reluctant to adopt AI systems fully. Now, I have the 4 goals of explainable AI here. These are to explain, to justify, control, improve, and discover. These are mostly about the decisions, like when a decision is made, it shouldn't come from a bias that came from the training of some model. Yeah. Or when we are talking about control, we should control for, I interpret it in 2 ways, which is like the typical control versus other subjects when you are doing some experiment. When you automate steps of it with AI, you have to be extra careful until you are sure your automation is correct. Also, there is this vulnerabilities that they mention in the paper. Yeah, also we can improve our current systems to make them more accurate and efficient. And we can use AI to discover patterns that were not known to us beforehand. Like the easiest, the first things about this that I remember seeing were in the domain of chess. Sometimes you would hear some big expert grandmaster talk about the weaknesses of making some move in general, but later some chess engines showed us that those moves that were thought to be usually weakening were actually, when used correctly, extremely effective in constraining your opponent in the game. So we came to the counterfactuals, the asterisk from the slide that I was showing earlier. There are counterfactuals in causality. These are about reasoning about imagined alternative worlds. So what would have happened if I hadn't done something? Like, let's say there's an oven that I turned on, and I burned some food in it. So if I'm asking myself what would happen if I hadn't turned on the heating, then what I'm doing is using a counterfactual.
So isn't that kind of like a proof that we have the world model in our heads, all of us? Because then, like, even little kids, they do
Mhm.
counterfactuals, fairy tales, and all of that stuff.
Yes.
So it is like, okay, inside of us, there is this world model, which has, it's a physical simulator of with different assumptions. And that's what counterfactual means. Oh, okay, this is what happened. And oh, what would have happened? So rerun the simulation by changing one parameter and kind of think about it. Okay, well, maybe this would have happened. Everything is like that, but I can't fly. Oh, okay, let's make Superman comics and make a lot of money and whatever.
Yeah.
That's stuff like that. It doesn't have to do with causality or anything. It's more with a world model because the world model can be incorrect to the world, to the real causal effects, but still counterfactual reasoning would work inside of that world model, whatever that is, however accurate it is. Yeah, that's interesting. Because I like the way I was introduced to counterfactuals is exactly when you have a graph that like the world model is not the world model, it's causal graph of interactions. And you can intervene and see, okay, this is what happened. I changed one parameter, only one parameter, why not? What would have happened? But now with deep learning, computer games and everything, this seems like, oh no, this is very different. Even when you playing computer game, it's like a counterfactual reasoning in a sense. Like everything is the same, but I don't know, I'll take this weapon instead of that weapon I took last time.
Yeah, and you can even see what would have actually happened, not just guess. If
You run the simulation. You run the simulation and see.
Yeah. So the ability to run simulations like that is very useful, for example, in aviation trainings, right? That's how pilots become pilots today. It has very important use cases like that. It also has, fiction that we have comes from a thinking process like this. For example, when you are a little kid, maybe you touch the electric socket once, and then you say, if I hadn't touched it, I wouldn't have got shocked, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good learning experience, by the way. I highly recommend it if you haven't done that. If you didn't have childhood.
Now let's move on to the counterfactuals in explainable AI. To differentiate it from counterfactuals in causality, in the paper they use counterfactual explanation as a term for explainable AI, which means minimal change in input that flips the model's prediction. For example, you are trying to predict how much income you need to get approved for a loan, and let's say you had X amount of income and you didn't get approved. You have some kind of a model, you run some simulations and see that if my income were $5,000 higher, my loan would be approved.
But is that technically an explanation? Because just because you change the input a little bit doesn't explain the mechanism that caused the prediction to be different.
I don't know, I'm kind of just relaying.
And it's still kind of like a black box, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you don't know why it happens. But for me, explanation is why, not that I can predict. Prediction is actually not an explanation.
Yeah. And
Input perturbation is probably the oldest XNAT method that I've seen. Surprising that they're trying to use it as a new method or talk about.
no, they are not saying this is new. They're just saying this is what this counterfactual explanation term means in explainable AI. I don't remember if it was very old. Maybe it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, now about the black box thing, yeah, that's one of the points they are trying to make too. So we have this black box that gives us explainable AI, but what is in the black box, can we explain it with causality. That's one of the potential benefits of intersecting causality and explainable AI. So about the counterfactual definition in causality, this is the source they are using, the Book of Why from Pearl and Mackenzie. We have this book. I should have brought it here.
Did you finish
to
it?
show it. I didn't finish it, but I went through.
I was procrastinating reading that book for too long, and then I read it in a week or so. I highly recommend it again. It's very easy read.
I finished like half.
Oh.
This part is these 3 rungs of causation. This is in the first half. I know that. Yeah, so there are 3 rungs of causation according to Earl and Mackenzie. These are association, intervention, and counterfactuals. And counterfactuals we just discussed. But before that, there's association, which is the probability that an apartment is warm if I see the heating system being on, for example. Or the general expression of it is seeing, observing recurrent patterns in an environment. And there's interventions. For this, we intervene with the environment and ask, what if I intervene, what happens as a result? And to represent these causal discussions in some data structure, typically we use directed acyclic graphs, which is the one on the right. If there was an edge from F to C, then we would have a cycle FC, and our graph would have been a directed cyclic graph. So, like in our project, to get to cycles, what we desire is usually to start from a graph like the one on the right. Yeah. So how do we intersect these 2 domains, explainable AI and causality? There are 3 perspectives about this, or you can call them critics of current approaches. The first one is critics to explainable AI under the causality lens. This is also divided into 3. These are lack of causality, pitfalls of explainable AI, and form of the explanations. In the paper, they talk about form of the explanations when it comes to the practicality of using the results from an explainable AI model. Like I said, a text or a chart, their experiments can be seen as a better way to explain it to the experts of some domains, because if they are the data scientists, or if they are from a similar field, they may not always appreciate the statistical measures like the accuracy. Sometimes the narrative matters more, even if your accuracy drops when you change your form, it can be worth it, because you are going to be affecting domain experts in a way they can use your results. For explainable AI for causality, they say they found only 3 papers. This is the opposite way of what is commonly explored.
It's because Pavel's paper is still under review.
Is this what your paper is about, Pavel?
It's like a simulator, which is supposed to be cosmic.
Okay, so these guys are trying to basically explain the inner works of causal models through explainable AI. Is that similar to what you're doing?
Maybe, but I think there is like some strange distinction in experimental AI between people who try and derive proper explanations, proper causality, and people who use statistical causality like Granger. I suppose mine is closer to the Granger because I'm still trying to predict, use my models to do predictions and derive the causality from.
Okay. The more common direction is causality for explainable AI. So there are some explainable AI models, but to understand them better, to be able to explain them better, instead of just treating them like a black box that gives us an output when you give it an input. All these papers in green, they try to explore that black box using causality. And these are also divided into three, which are causal counterfactual explanations, causal tools for supporting explainable AI, and accessing the causal model is explaining. So the last one says, once we have that causal model, that causal model itself is the explanation of the explainable AI model. And within that, accessing the causal model that is explaining, there's also another subgroup. They say all of the papers that deal with causal discovery use Bayesian networks. So that was interesting. I guess that's also why they made this arrow in the figure specifically for this, because there are many papers, because Bayesian networks are so popular and they are easy to connect to causal discovery discussions. We see all those papers.
They're relatively primitive in the sense that they are not representing latent variables and things like that. Causal discovery field has progressed beyond just simple Bayesian networks like ancestral graphs and things like that. So there are better structures, but they're more advanced, I guess. Bayesian networks, 20 years old, so actually 35.
However many years old they are, it's like from 2021 and 2022, they found all these papers still very.
Well, yeah, because they're simple models, easy to understand, rather like you. The ancestral graphs are more advanced, more complicated models, and so because they're more powerful, more expressive, and like in Bayesian networks, you basically assume that there are no unobserved common causes, then you can represent everything. You just don't represent labels and things like that. So.
Ask them to write samples and see what they can do. Okay. And this is their method to filter through the papers, and in the end they acquired 51 studies in their review. They searched the 4 databases that you see at the top. They go into a lot of detail about like why they didn't use Google Scholar or other databases, but I found that part boring and not really worth to mention. But I thought at least let's include this. One thing I need to say about this is, if we go back, here you will see these are all up to 2022. So they first submitted in 2022 or early 2023, and then they revised it in 2024, and they make a whole section in their discussion to say, hey, In 2024, this approach is, this clustering is still the same, the ratios of all these topics in the papers. But I think they just did this figure in 2022 and that didn't touch it.
So didn't update the figure.
Yeah, they didn't update the figure.
But
They
that's
really-
kind of bad because review papers go outdated quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's all from me. If you have questions, I can answer.
Can you go back to the history slide?
History slide. So,
What is deductive nomological?
I don't know. Does anybody know?
I'm not as familiar.
What is deductive nomological model?
It's like, here, super cool.
Deductive nomological model of scientific explanation.
Also known as Hampel's model. So the guy on the left. In big classes.
Yeah, so it's more of a philosophy of science model, saying that physical phenomena are fully explained by science when you can logically deduce, phenomena by the laws of nature and initial conditions. So it's less about causality and more about sort of sufficient explanations of nature. Seems to be a little bit about causality, I guess. Yeah, there's a lot in that gap around Hume. Hume was actually skeptical of causality, right, as a real phenomenon. He thought that causality was sort of human imposition and construction. And so there's a lot more, when you're talking about counterfactuals and causality, there's like the differences and what Sergey was saying as well tend to be like, what a counterfactual means in a metaphysical sense. Like, is it saying something about reality? Is it saying something about the system of logic and the language? That's I think where a lot of the differences tend to lie in terms of what counterfactual means. But I tend to think of it as like counterfactual just means how something could be otherwise. So the possible worlds stuff and all that, whether they're real possible worlds and for fake possible worlds, all this stuff I think is not as interesting. Yeah.
No, but that's simulation, right? So counterfactual is more about ability to simulate. And kind of rely on the outcome. So to a certain extent, like, okay, if I do this and that in this world, I will get there. It's
Right.
kind of ability to plan. And if you have better world model, then animals can do, say, counterfactual planning, but they're poorer world model. Their horizon is shorter, I assume, right? And so humans can plan ahead 20 years. We just don't do it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there's kind of a difference in what you were describing, Sergey, initially about the world model is, there's the counterfactual in that sense where you're like, trying to do counterfactual reasoning, like if this happens, I'll do this, if that happens, I'll do this, versus sort of counterfactual and physical systems. You're like, what if I had changed that variable? And
Well, it's like the power of hindsight, right? But you learn from it. Like something happened and you've done this and you're thinking, oh, if I would have done that, the outcome would have been better. So next time when you're in the same situation, you simulated it already. Hindsight is a bad example because you suffered the bad consequences, so then you learn.
Right.
But if you pre-simulated, then you trained on without consequences of, I don't know, burning yourself or putting your electric current in your finger or something.
Right.
And also that interesting stuff about counterfactual as simulation is that as we've noticed recently, maybe it's marketing, but the progress in the real world, the material progress, kind of much slower than the software, than the more electronic progress because it's very hard to simulate by building physical models. Say Apollo project and stuff like that. They burned, in a sense, they burned billions by building what could have been simulated, like what we can simulate now. But they had to build it, break it, build, change it, build, and then like now, SpaceX simulates lots of stuff. And then only like a keyframe. Oh, let's do an actual experiment to update our simulators. So if we could, this is counterfactual reasoning. If we could simulate material creation, I don't know, lots of material world, we could progress faster by building better real stuff, real as in material, not virtual.
Also, we wouldn't need like human or like animal test subjects. We could just, test things on in a simulated environment with the proper, explainability.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the approaches to the test is to actually run precise physical simulations, which is very expensive. But if we could figure out how to make it less expensive, then ideally, yes. Oh, let's just add a drop of this drug into this amount of simulated, I don't know, tissue, and see what will happen to proteins by running the simulation and diffusion and all of that. We cannot do that yet, I think, but maybe we can use heuristics like neural networks as approximations to some of the parts of the ODE, so we don't have to run the entire simulations everywhere.
So I had a very old idea that I never iterated on, but it is essentially about complexity and physical simulations and using deep learning to, kind of not only to compress regions that are not that don't need to be like the highest resolution, but also using it to determine like which regions you can, like not only to do the compression, but to determine like which parts of the simulation can be compressed initially. So, simultaneously a like decision model and a compression system, like where you're deciding where information can be lost without like losing precision, and then actually doing that compression.
Like something like if you coarse grain this part of the space, then the effect will only be visible in 3 minutes of real time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you fast forward and then recompute, like compute only every 3 minutes real time, whatever your computation time takes.
Exactly.
Faster. It's like implicit solvers, right? You kind of do make this phase leap that, okay, let's think it's a linear model for now, Euler for a while, but then, the error is going up, recompute.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But with controlled not hallucinogens, but hallucinators. Like they hallucinate the solutions for you, and you're like, oh, we're fine, we're still within the error. Assuming computing the error is cheap.
Right.
Cheaper than actually running the simulation. It's like, we need to recompute, something is diverging.
Right.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I think that'd be an interesting system to set up, but be really useful. I had there was a similar idea where I wanted to do with like graphic processing as well, because it's something you see in like a lot of like visualizations and how GPUs will visualize scenes as well. They'll like choose where to visualize with certain amounts of complexity and stuff. So I think there's like cool like.
Well, this is like Fraunhofer algorithm, psychophysical,
exactly.
because we are easy to visual is kind of cheating. I mean,
visuals.
It's not science because you're cheating. Like our visual system is full of bugs, and so you're like, you don't need to compute. People just can't tell the real water.
Right. Yeah. Visualizations are easier to do because you can make more heuristics. I think.
Well, I mean, it's not heuristics; it's psychology. It's like
it is.
The perceiving system has bugs, and you can exploit.
Exactly.
Them. Nomos meaning law. Okay, I'm still at the deductive logical. Are you done with the paper?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. So what was the paper about then? Just the
It was
summary.
a review paper summarizing
What is the conclusion? What shall we do?
The conclusion
What's the
is,
meaning of life?
the conclusion is they still are figuring out the meaning of life,
Mm.
and they don't know when they will be done.
And how does causality and explainability enter the picture?
They are looking at the clustering of papers that try to intersect causality and explainable AI in these three different ways. And they say it's still this kind of clustering, and causality, the green one is the main one that they are supporting. Causality for XAI is going to be very useful for explaining phenomena in many different domains.
So why would you not want to use causality for explainable AI?
Why would you not want to use
Yeah.
it? I mean, they aren't really answering that. They are really, they are just trying to see how that intersection is made. They are never saying, hey, don't make this intersection.
So how about this, if I give you a scenario to talk about, can you use their framework to kind of talk about it? So let's say I have an LLM where I have implemented some kind of reasoning explanation within that LLM. So it not only gives an output when you give it a prompt, but it does like, Claude does, and it gives you the sort of the lines of reasoning, right? Which are still, these linguistic outputs from the model.
Yeah.
So how would you sort of connect causality with what that model is doing in terms of explainability, where it's using its own language modeling to explain its own sort of cascade of activations and outputs and stuff. Yeah, is there something you could talk about?
Yeah, so in your example, you have your input, you have your output, but your LLM is also explaining the causality steps, right? So if that explanation is made really well, then that aligns with this green part. The causality for explainable AI put into text form. So I don't know, did I get the question right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think yeah, what I'm kind of skeptical of with models like Claude, right, is that the reasoning explanations that the model gives are also language modeling outputs that are made to look like reason, right? So they aren't. There's a skeptical kind of tinge whenever I see those kinds of things, because I'm like, are they actually measuring so when you have the input in the model and then you look at the cascade of activations, are those linguistic outputs actually aligning with what those activations are doing, what the model is actually doing, or is it just a linguistic simulation of what a model thinks reasoning looks like, which is, I think, more likely for these kinds of models.
The latter is more likely, like you
Right,
said. If we can make the formula a reality, I think that's gonna be huge news, right?
Right.
I mean, like that's very interesting. Ties back to what you mentioned long ago in the other room about teaching students and evaluating students, because that like where I come from, the kind of German Russian culture of education, exams are oral, and it's so funny. Like you can immediately see like people, like I'm sure professors, like the people just don't understand what they're talking about, and like by trying to regurgitate whatever they read for the subject, but still they're making like a reasoning, cobbling up, like, oh, this is because of that, and blah blah blah. But it's just like total nonsense. When you interview people, you can see that it's like, do you know deep learning? Of course, I know deep learning and stuff like that. Okay, tell me how this works. And they do tell you, but it's just like, oh my god. So I'm just telling that even though LLMs don't work like humans' brains supposedly, but they do the same thing. by trying to come up with explanation at all costs, and it's just
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting sort of phenomenon. It's what I wrote my undergrad thesis on, right? Because it's like, how do you determine? So I wrote my thesis on like mathematical pedagogy, and how do you sort of know if a student has really understood material, right? As a teacher, you can't just inspect their neurons directly and look and say like, looks like your neurons look like neurons that have learned how to do addition correctly.
if you could just burn it in, then no learning needed.
Right. So that's what, when you have explainability in AI, is things like saliency and integrated gradients, that's kind of, and even activations, that's kind of what people have been doing historically, is you're kind of looking directly at the neurons, trying to see like, okay, that looks like an activation.
Yeah, it's a
pattern.
complete white box.
Right.
I mean, you see it and you don't understand still. I mean, it's
And
not
so
true.
now you have then approaches like what Claude does with its explainability, where it will then try to linguistically reason, but then it's, again, kind of doing things that sound like reasoning, but maybe aren't still reflecting the content of what the model knows. So there's an interesting kind of, philosophy of language and philosophy of mind kind of question here. Like, how does language give us access to what's going on in like people's minds and in models' minds? How do people use language to express things differently, and how do these models do that? And how can we, build causal systems that give us causal explanations for what models are doing? How can models give us causal explanation for physical phenomena? Interesting, set of questions. So that's up to, well,
Yeah, like you said, we want the models that reason like humans. I don't, because we know formal reasoning. We know how to reason
Mhm.
better than animals. We would rather have models that reason better than according to more formal, more robust rules.
Mhm.
It's just, I want the models to correct me and cite an article of, okay, your reasoning is wrong because you went this
Yeah,
way.
they never do that currently.
Yeah.
Unless, you say something totally wrong in some common domain. Yeah, I don't really.
No, I see that more. Surprisingly, I see that more from GPT-5, which nobody likes. But either in the style of my prompting or working with it, but it's like, no, you're wrong. It's like it's totally impossible. And I see more of that. Or it's like,
Okay, that's good.
it comes to me like, don't say that. This is a cliche. It tells me. I'm like, okay, good.
less convincing.
Yeah, more like it's getting slightly better at that. Yeah, at critiquing back.
So,
Okay.
yeah, if it can do that even better in all the domains, then is that gonna be the first form of AGI?
I don't know what AGI is because, like I heard Demis Hassabis when he talks about AGI, he means something as good as human civilization. Basically, if you listen to them, it's like no, like they don't mean no single human can do what we're after, like what in this. So it's like it's something as good as entire human civilization. Then it's AGI.
That's not what I understand from AGI. What I understand is, for example, right now we can have AI models that are perfect for one specific task or as close to perfect as possible. But imagine an LLM or whatever model you're using that has this kind of accuracy, this kind of perfection for all the domains, anything you can think of.
That's human civilization. No single human can do that.
Okay.
No single human can do 5% of that. Maybe 1% of that. No single human can do.
Mhm.
So, and that's what I. It's
Yeah.
like what are they? What is AGI then? It's like Well, anyways, I don't know. It's a marketing term, so it's
The marketing. Yeah.
yeah.
AGI is pretty ill-defined. Narrow ASI is well-defined because it has to be scoped to the task.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can say superhuman chess player, and that is meaningful.
Mhm.
Or human fear improving agent, and that's kind of meaningful also. But you can't say ASI for every task that humans can do because that's not even a thing that you can define.
Exactly. It's kind of weird, and I can't do any tasks that any random human can do. I can't even do backflip. Come on. So Well, anyways, thanks everyone. We're lucky. The projector is misbehaving in that other room. And Zmap talks today is about AI, something. So they say it's gonna be good. I don't know. Do you know?
It's about like using AI tools for job searching.
So Maria is gonna give the talk, or
I don't know who's giving it, but I think, yeah, it's about like using stuff to augment your resume and stuff like that.
Mike needs to give a talk how to use Twitter to get to learn.
There you go. Yeah, how do you use
I could give that talk. I could give that talk. That'll be a very fun talk.
Okay, thanks everyone, and thanks Selim. That was a nice
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you, Selim.
Yes.
Thank you.